we move to the 29th gate, the abysmal, the deep within the deep. This is a wonderful channel, this 2946. It's a nice juxtaposition to have the 46 pushing upward and the 29, the abysmal, at the other end. They're quite a polarity. We come to the third variation of the right angle cross of contagion. And you can see that by the time you come up with an answer, the next test in the evolutionary process is whether or not that answer can be contagious. Will that answer catch on? And the only way you can find out if that answer will catch on is if you live out the experience that answer leads you to. This is not logical, after all. It's not about, this is what happens. You have people who hear an answer, and the logical person will continue logically with that answer and will try to experiment with it and test it and verify it. And the abstract person will not wait for the scientific evidence. They'll just jump in and say, well, let's try it now. You hear about medications for cancer as an example, possibilities that are taking place in research. Now, everybody has to wait for the experimentation to take place in order for the validity of that particular medicine to be recognized to truly be of value. But abstract people would just jump in there and take it themselves in the moment, whether they die or not, for the experience. So here, moving to the 29, answers often lead to just plain experiential stuff without getting experimented with. So you got this new medicine and you got somebody who experiences that medicine, and that it happens to turn out to be positive for them, and there are other factors at work. The fact that they've experienced it, they say, look, I took it, it's okay for me, why does everybody else have to wait? If the pressure in the collective becomes so strong, then the medicine gets released because of experience instead of experiment. They may find out through experimentation that the long-term results, or the whatever the case may be deeply detrimental to those people taking the medication. But the experiential people do not wait. And yet this is a pattern in our genetics. It's a pattern in our genetics for people to jump from an answer and go directly into the experience. What to do? The deep within the deep. Persistence, despite difficulties, has its inevitable rewards. The 29th gate is a beautiful gate. That is, it is beautiful in the sense that it provides the generative energy. This is a generating channel. It provides the generative energy to make the commitment to life. Mystically, the 29th gate is one of the 5 gates of the death sequence. Don't ask me the rest. And it is when the 29th gate does not make a commitment that the being dies. So the 29th gate is very magical. It says yes to life. It says yes to experience. But it's not aware. Can I borrow your life? Yes. Can I fuck you up? Yes. Can I take your wife? Yes. Can I shoot your dog? Yes. It's not aware. And if you carry the 29th gate in your design, you can only make legitimate commitments based on the nature of your design, your definition, your authority, your type. If you live out your nature, then you can make commitments that are valuable because you'll stay with them. The first line is called the draftee. The ability to adapt to struggle. Well, if you don't wait to find out whether the answer is true or not, and you just jump on the bandwagon, yes, you're going to meet some struggle. When necessary, but not as a permanent state, Mars exalted, the innate nature to apply energy in times of war or peace. That is the power to persevere when necessary, but not generally. That's the foundation of making a commitment. It's called the draftee. It's not about saying, I'm here to say yes, I'm here to say yes, ask me, I'll say yes. A commitment, a collective commitment, has to come from the outside. And remember, they don't know what the outside is. And the first line is introspective. It's actually deeply concerned about what is a commitment and what happens if you make a commitment. And is it necessary to make a commitment? Because that's where it is in its life. The detriment, Neptune in detriment. Whenever you see Neptune at the foundation, you know that this is a hexagram that is already changing. That is, it's evolving. And because it's Neptunian, we cannot really see the full process that's involved. That can't happen in our lifetimes. The deep impressionability whose mark from times of struggle may make a return to normal conditions extremely difficult. Hesitation in making commitments based on past experience. Now look, this is the very basis of making commitments. The very basis of making commitments is that you're always being dragged into them in life. That's the first thing to understand. It's collective. It's about sharing. You must make a commitment to me. I need your help now. So the 29 is always going to be called upon to make a commitment. That commitment is always there in the collective field. They must share. What happens to them is that they can do it for so long if they enter into it naturally. On the other hand, what happens so often, almost everyone that I've ever experienced who has the 29th gate has been burnt so badly in making commitments. And then they become resistant. And this isn't healthy either. Again, if you live out your nature, the commitment will be correct. Anyone who carries this gate is designed to make commitments. It's necessary for them to fulfill themselves and others in the collective process, but as themselves. Otherwise, it's chaos and pain. Because the other end of this channel is the 46th gate, and this is the gate of the body. And this is the gate of the body that is the lead gate for the house that contains all the splenic gates. That if you don't enter into commitment properly, you do damage to your physical body and health. There are so many 29s, who kill themselves through kindness, who exhaust themselves through commitment. Because if it's not correct, it puts incredible pressure on the body. The 46th gate is the gate of the love of the body, and on the immune system. The second line, assessment. The 29-2 is somebody who does not make commitments unless they're called upon. The second line, after all. They don't even know that making a commitment to things is necessary. They don't know that. They have to learn that life will demand of them, because they carry that genetic material, life will demand of them that they make commitments. And they will be called upon to make commitments. Persistence tempered by caution. The sun exalted. The power of sustainment as a guiding light. And this is a great key to understand what it is to enter into things correctly. You see, the abstract process requires a complete surrendered commitment to experience in order to reach a point of reflection and awareness later. And that can only take place when sustainment, when the energy is there to stay with the commitment. You know, if you're a sacral being, a generator with a defined sacral in the 29th gate, and you make a commitment with your throat, it isn't going to work. And so you're going to have to leave that commitment at some point, break promises at some point. It's the sustainment that gives the commitment its value. In other words, the fact that you like being in the experience, that you feel good physically and your energy in the experience is what's important. And you can only have that when you enter as your true self. Venus in detriment, a tendency to overcautiousness when persistence is perceived as adding to rather than ending disharmony. That is caution in saying yes, where perseverance leads to disharmony. These are people who say yes, who make a commitment and won't quit. And it causes all kinds of problems for other people. You know, they just won't stop. They made the commitment. You know, you have to fill 12 baskets with apples each day. They make that commitment, but everybody finds out that you can only do 10. You know, the fact that they keep on going to get to the 12 annoys everybody else and makes them very uncomfortable. You know, this persistence once they've made a commitment. But you can see very clearly that the caution is ingrained because it is a second line. They try to avoid in their life making commitments. They try. You know, they don't want to, but it is genetically in their nature to have that called out. Again, they have to be educated to that. You have a child who has a 29 too. You have to tell them that their friends are constantly going to try to get them to say yes to things. And that they have to learn to be cautious about that. That they have to learn how to enter into that kind of an arrangement. Evaluation, the third line. By the very nature of what a third line represents, the martyr, the anarchist, after all, the bonds made and broken, the trial and error, that you see right away that a 29-3 can get into a lot of trouble in the sense that it's easy to make the commitment, but it's very hard to sustain it. Bonds made and broken. When the 29 lower trigram makes a commitment to itself, it's at its best. That's so important to understand. And yet in making commitments to themselves, they're perceived as being selfish by the collective that wants them to share. But it's very important that the orientation of commitment is commitment to themselves, to their own personal destiny. And so here in the third line, evaluation, it is one of the most enlightened of third lines. In this context, properly assessed in action. And look at this Mars. You never see a Mars like this anywhere. It says, despite the urge and cost of inaction, the knowledge that it's sometimes better to fight another day. This is a very special third line. And it is this Mars in this position that says, I know that I can't succeed until then. Now, that process, this is an introduction line. Oh, that doesn't mean that happens right away. It takes years and years and years of banging your head. It takes years of people saying, why did you quit on me? You have to go through that whole process until you finally can get to that point. That you learn that you don't have to make the commitment. That there are conditions for you, and those conditions are your design. Jupiter in detriment, a preference for withdrawal in principle with little regard for effect. The Mars has the power to wait, but the Jupiter is the inability to make commitments, the power of caution. And again, because it's an introductory line, they have to come to that. They get to the point where they say, no, I'm not going to try to make a commitment to anybody because it's not going to work. I'm sick of this. That's okay. Of course it's okay. The fourth line. Think about the nature of this cross. The cross is the cross of contagion. Making a commitment is one of the most contagious things in the world. It's contagious. You know, you get these real estate hustlers, you know, and they bring 40 people into a room and they show pictures of some exotic place and God knows where you can get your condo and whatever. And there's 2 or 3 people in the room who are going to be plants. And you know, at the end of this presentation, when they talk about signing up to take this trip to go there, that, you know, one of these people sign, I'll do that. And they come up there with their, you know, with their partner and they stand there and make chit-chat and fill out the paper. And slowly somebody else will stand up. And to make a commitment is something that requires a great deal of abstract bravery. That is the madness of the abstract to try any experience. You know, they jump up and say, all right, and it's contagious. And it's so important to understand that. So the caution in the 29 is something that is of value because it's a value not just for them, but collectively. They're often seen as anti-collective forces, and they're not. They're not at all. In many ways, by not making a commitment, they're removing a certain kind of contagion from the life force, which may be of advantage to those people who would otherwise follow that. So here we have the transpersonal fourth line, and it says directness. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Saturn exalted. The wisdom to use the simplest and most direct approach to solve difficulties. That is, the power to commit oneself to the simplest and most direct process. And these are people who can really say no. You know, of all the 6 variations of this gate of saying yes, the fourth line knows how to say no. What it's externalizing is what it is ready to commit to that's advantage to the collective. So it will say no to anything that doesn't fit into its fixed externalizing commitment. I only make my commitment to saving bunny rabbits. I'm not interested in saving dogs. Don't distract me. No, I will not say yes to helping dogs. I'm into rabbits. Direct. Focused. The detriment. Venus. Simplicity and directness all too often as seen as inharmonic and aesthetically crude. Yes. How true. You know, these are people that have their commitment. And if you try to pull them away or you try to interfere with that, they can be quite direct and nasty to you. So they should be. Remember the secret of the abstract process. Once you make a commitment, you have to surrender to the experience, otherwise you derive no value from it. So if you're in the middle of doing something and somebody comes up to you and starts to bug you about doing something else, it's okay for you to tell them to disappear. Now, it may come out very rude. But after all, you're here to be in the experience and not distracted. Otherwise, when you get to the end of the day and you lie down in your bed at night, that you don't get the wisdom derived from that day's experience. You don't get the revelation of what you've been through. You don't get to answer the problems that you've met. This is the whole secret. Remember something ironic, that the existential system, the existential circuitry of the abstract is actually in activity, in action itself, much more existential than the individuality that is existential in the integration system. You see, that's the whole thing about abstract people. They are very existential. They are basically not in touch with anything that's going on while they're doing it. They're just there. And the magic is that they can know so much about experience if they just act like that and then come later to the experience and reflect upon it. So this directness is very important. What it's saying is, I have made a single commitment, a commitment to this thing. And as long as I'm surrendered to that, I'm going to learn so much about it. Don't you come in here and bother me. The other thing is, of course, that when people are 29-4s, the quality and the depth of their commitment is influential to others and contagious. I'm going to help you with the rabbits, okay? I'll give up on dogs. The last 7 minutes and 30 seconds of the fourth line, you get to the change of the designed sun-earth in the cross, and the 8 and the 14 go away, and the 20 and the 34 appear. Those of you that go through this process and begin to look at these crosses will recognize that some crosses create definition. This is an example of a cross that has a definition. The 2034, the channel of charisma, where thoughts must become deeds. Here in this juxtaposition cross, we have the 29, the 30, the 20, and the 34. This is a very unusual cross, and it's a very unusual cross in our time, and it's a cross that one can really see as being a cross of tragedy in our time. That is, this cross is the 29-4, the 30-4. The 34 is burnout. If you look at the 34th line, you'll also see that the exalted, because it's Plutonic or Neptunian, I can't remember which, but whatever the fact, it doesn't exist. There's only the detriment active now in the 30 in the fourth line. Anyone who carries the 34th line only lives out the detriment, which is the potential always for burnout. So here we have the juxtaposition cross of commitment. These are people that can really burn out. The 2034, the channel of the charisma, as an expression verbally, is always saying, I am busy now, I am busy now, I am busy now. I am busy making a commitment, burning out. I am busy making a commitment, burning out. I am busy making a commitment, burning out. They can make incredible commitments, but they may not live long. It will depend on their design. It will depend on how they enter into experience. But this is an unusual juxtaposition cross. It has a totally different meaning every 256 years. That is the cycle of Pluto. So I should check that. It's right here. It is Pluto, yeah. So every 256 years, we will have as incarnative forces, forces that come in that get the exalted from the 34th line, and not simply just the detriment. So at this time, this is quite an unusual cross. If you meet this in your work, if you meet this as a client, the most important thing for them is not the inherent potential for tragedy in that cross, but the recognition is that that tragedy is perfect for them if they enter into it properly. It is okay to make commitments and burn out if you're doing that correctly. That is, after all, your genetic material. The left angle cross here is called the left angle cross of industry. Contagion, commitment, and then industriousness. Industry. And that industry is the 29, the 30, the 20, and the 34, so that I am busy now takes on another value. Being busy, being industrious, getting things done. Very important cross. It is the transpersonal commitment. It's the universalization of commitment, and you can see right away what it brings to the fifth line. Overreach. The tendency to bite off more than one can chew. Think about the general. The general sits in the countryside waiting for that opportunity, that fifth line, waiting for that opportunity, that moment of crisis to be able to bring its particular gift and to be able to succeed. And of course, when you get to the 29.5, at the moment of crisis, when it's necessary for someone to make the commitment, if you don't volunteer, nobody will volunteer. If you don't put your hand up and say that we have to do this, that we should do this, nobody else is going to follow us. And in that kind of situation, the 5 can get way in over its head, making a commitment to something that it cannot really fulfill. At the same time, by making the commitment, things start happening. They start happening. The busyness takes place. Things start getting done. The Sun exalted, where the drive is in the design and not ambition driven. In other words, it's not their fault. It's not like they're taking on all of these commitments for their ego. They just don't have any choice. And because commitment is something that we need all the time, and because there's always crisis, the 29.5 is always being called on to be the solution, to be the one whose commitment will make a difference. Now, when I have 29.5s, and I know so many of them, when I have 29.5s as a client, all I'm saying to them is, look, you're here to bite off more than you can chew. You are. That's okay. But you have to know what to bite off more of. You have to know which thing to bite a lot of. And then it's okay for you. It will always be okay. Including the detriment. The earth in detriment, and you can see this is a sun-earth line, so you can see that people come in on very, very fixed crosses here. And so you have people that come in on the detriment cross. You know, the cross of industry that's going to be a failure. Guaranteed. The earth in detriment, failed ambition. Now, by the way, first of all, aside from the fact that there's nothing wrong with that, what it simply means is that the moment that the 5 is called upon, it is not able to fulfill that commitment. It can't. Now that's the failure. What may have been started by that commitment may go on and be of enormous value. Remember that the 35th line, which is part of this cross configuration, is always ready to accept what is. It's not the end of the world. It is simply a way in which that operates for the 5th line. Remember, when you look at genetic continuity, you're going to see that each line has, in a spectrum, more advantages in one hexagram than in the other. In other words, that they seem to fit better to one hexagram or the other. This is a case where the 5th line has to deal with failed expectation. And it's something that it must learn. It's interesting to see something about the nature of commitment. The foundation of commitment is the draftee. You know, commitment is necessary. You have to get into the commitment, so that's what it is. But what the general society sees in the 5th line is it always sees it as being ambitious. It always sees it as overreaching. You know, you've got 20 workers working on a railway track. You don't want anyone to overreach. You don't want somebody to make a bigger commitment. It makes everybody look bad. Everybody gets annoyed. So the society likes failure. They like to see people crash. They like to see the mighty fall. You know, if it's not you that jumped out of the office building in 29, and you've been unemployed for a few years, you don't mind. Human beings. The 6th line. It's such a nice line, eh? Confusion. The state that exists when momentum outstrips awareness. Now remember the nature of 6 lines. They really live out the burnout, the burning of their fingers early in their life. 29-6 is going to make a lot of commitments early in life. I'll do that, I'll do that, I'll do that, I'll do that, on and on and on. And of course, what happens with that is that the momentum outstrips awareness. Now, understand something. That means that they can actually fulfill all of that. It's just they don't know what the hell they're doing. They make all of these commitments and they can actually handle all of that, but they don't know what they're doing and it makes them feel very uncomfortable, so they quit and they go up on the hill. It's not that they cannot, it's not the 5th line. This is not about overreaching and failing. This is about the capacity to really be able to make commitments, but there's so many commitments that you lose connection to the value of those commitments. And you don't then get the opportunity to reflect on them. Mars exalted, driving blind, and given Mars's energy and determination, often blind luck. You got all these things going in the fire and you're trying to control all of that. And you can be lucky and be able to hold all of that together. Exhausted too. Everybody who carries the 29, everybody who carries it, knows the risk of saying yes to things. Everyone who carries that. The more aware you are of how the mechanism works, the more clear you can become. That's all. It's not about, it's like talking about the emotional system. We're mechanics. That is, we are able to see the mechanical nature of things. That's all. That's all. It's a mechanical process. And the moment we accept that mechanical process, we can see it for what it is and we can live with it. We just can. Jupiter in detriment, a tendency and confusion to withdraw rather than accept the condition and continue to persevere, the power and confusion to caution rather than saying yes. And of course, they're always pulled on. It's very, very hard for the 29-6 to be left alone on the hill. It's very hard. And what they end up doing is in order to avoid coming down from the hill, they use their 6 gift to point out who can be industrious. Johnny will say yes. What, you broke? You need some money? Harry has some money. They just pointed out, What is so interesting for me about the nature of commitment in terms of the wheel is that when you finally figure out what a proper commitment actually is, you discover that it's the need for sexual intimacy. It's a funny transition, eh? You go through this whole process of, what's the most important commitment I can make? What commitment is really of value, says the 29-6. And when it looks down over the hill, the first thing it sees is the possibility to be able to make love to somebody. It seems like that's an interesting commitment to make.